Hello everyone, it's Richard here. I was unable to get my OBS to work with me while I was trying to play this scenario. It kept crashing on me, and I find that if I'm not activating OBS when I play this scenario, that I can play without having misclick errors and all kinds of other things, and it's playing smoother. So I think my nearly 5-year-old laptop is having trouble playing the game and running OBS. So what I did instead is I recorded the playthrough, and then I will discuss what's happening and skimming forward as I go through it. And eventually, I have this on YouTube on private at the moment, but I will upload it publicly. But I wanted to get this video out first. And I'll talk about what's going on. The first thing I'll mention about this scenario is I think it's a scenario that with Deductor's mod would surprise an experienced expert level player. I imagine they would think I got past Dunkirk and the worst is over. But with the stat adjustments Deductor has made on armor, especially, this scenario is scary stuff. You're gonna see that when I fast forward. I play very carefully, and I try to minimize risk. But the consequence for that is I feel under intense pressure on the clock, and I don't do things as fast as in regular game. It's a little bit easier to do certain things in the regular game. But you're also going to notice some weird peculiarities I hope to catch when I speed through because of the Doctor's mod, you're going to see weird things like Char V1s ran out of fuel, which is great because that's realistically what happened in the Battle for France. I find basically every scenario challenging with the Doctor's mod, but this one was shockingly difficult, especially since I handled Stone pretty well. Misogyny was a little challenging. Amiens was hard. I acknowledge that I barely squeezed in the decisive. Amiens is a little bit harder than this scenario, but you're going to see that this is not easy at all. So the first thing let's scroll all the way back to the beginning. What you're going to see me do is send a small strike force down this region. I'm assuming that the counterattack coming from this direction, there won't be much over here. I think an expert level player would feel comfortable with that assumption. So I'm not going to put a lot of units over here. I just want enough units to slide south and gobble up some easy hexes. And the bulk of my units are going to be over here. And I bring 4 fighters, a fighter bomber, and my tactical bomber. I really need these units. The Air Force is scary in this scenario, and you're going to see some surprising results when we play it out. I like to bring a lot of backup units for these scenarios. That if you have been following my playthrough up to this point, you know a key part of my strategy is having a ton of ground backup units. I don't believe in the Air Force. It's not because I think the Air Force is bad. It's just that with Deductor's mod, I can't steamroll ground units that easily. In fact, I play defensively, very defensively, because I can't really go mano a mano against French armor or British armor, so I have to kind of set traps and pull the armor to me. But even if I do set traps, my armor does get beat up. You have seen several scenarios where my tanks are nearly destroyed at the end of the scenario. That is actually an intentional part of my plan. It's me kind of gaming Deductor's mod a little bit, because I know that it is extremely difficult to use classical methods to defeat a scenario. Deductor didn't believe that you could play on Rommel with his mod and get decisive victories in 1943. That's how hard he made the mod. He thought that it was impossible. But clearly he showed that even on a more severe difficulty level, you can get decisive victories, but it takes a crazy amount of skill. And I don't have his skill level, so I'm using tricks to disguise my lack of skill to kind of get these decisive victories. And the most basic trick that I use is I have a ton of ground units. And you're going to kind of see me use them very carefully if I can. Because I really don't want them engaged in combat, except under the most controlled circumstances. And I think that's rather clever of me, and it for the most part works. And because of the prestige situation being so serious, I can't use elite replacements. That's okay, because you don't need them, strictly speaking, for the early war. But going forward, I am going to be a lot more concerned about experience, and at some point I will have to actually elite replace my units. I may actually have to stop doing OBS while I'm playing because I've had a lot of misclick errors in my playthrough, and that's okay in the early war, but now I can't afford misclick errors. So I may have to just play it and then show the replay and then analyze the replay with you on a YouTube video. And then I can upload the replay, and if you want to see everything I did, that will be there. So the first thing you can see is I'm gobbling up, I'm on turn 2, and I'm gobbling up the standard objectives. We can move forward. Oh, I had left the computer right about here. So if you watch this video, don't forget to skip this part. Okay, we're back on turn 2. I made a mistake here. I put a fighter, I forgot to fighter cover those units, and that was not good. So you can see I'm rapidly moving south. So my plan is I'm going to seize the airfield in the middle. I think a blind player would notice that the airfields are far away from the action, and the only airfield that is reasonable to reach is this one. And you need to move there with speed. So, you know, I'm going to go grab that airfield. One thing that you missed is that the fighters one fighter did 3 damage to one of my 3-star experienced fighters, and another fighter did 1 damage. I think that would shock people because you're used to your fighters basically steamrolling the enemy. And with Deductor's Mod, it doesn't happen as often because most fighters are buffed. So you're actually going to experience losses when you engage in combat. I try to, cover up the smaller gap in stats between the planes by making sure my fighters are extremely experienced, and I try to use mass attack bonus, and I try to use my 88 guns. And that has worked very, very well so far. But I'm definitely going to have beat-up fighters at the end of this scenario. And that's okay because fighter fights are very easy up through, I think, Crete. I think there's like 1 hard fighter on Crete. And then after that, you have Minsk and Smolensk. And he did not, I don't remember if he buffed early Soviet fighters. I don't think he did. So my planes are going to get their experience back, and it's going to be fine. I will get very protective of my fighters, and at some point, probably Leningrad maybe, or Vyazma, I will elite replace them if they take damage. I hope that my 3-star fighters can hold their own, and hopefully they have a good hero. One strategy I'll probably use is attack with my defense hero fighter first, hoping to not take damage, and then attack with weaker fighters, or with fighters that don't have quite as good of a hero. And that will minimize the amount of damage I take. So here you see I'm doing something clever. I'm going to move my scout in, damage the artillery, and then pull it out and put my tank in. It's just a cheesy way to just try to prevent damage. I have a 2 scout cars in my scout tank. I find it very useful to have scouting. So another thing you're going to see start happening probably in 1941 is I will bring 2 scout cars, my scout tank, and either a cavalry unit or a Crotchetson, and I'm going to have like 4 scouting units, and maybe even 5 scouting units. I should probably mute this so you can hear me. So I'm probably going to have 5 scouting units in my playthrough in 41 and possibly 42, because a core part of my theory about how to play these scenarios better is having a lot of scouting. If you carefully advance with scouting, you can set traps, you can see where counterattacks are coming. I think that especially if let's say you're not as intuitive as Bricata, let's say he gets away with a lot of things because he just has this crazy intuition about where the enemy is. It's really disturbing sometimes how accurate his analysis is. And let's say that you're not a tactical genius like Deductor is. So one way to kind of help you play at a high level if you don't have those skills is you scout the enemy. I think people underestimate how valuable it is to have very high quality scouting. And you can see I'm using scouting all the time in my playthrough. I would have had a cavalry unit immediately in Poznan if I could afford it. It's just you're less likely to make a terrible mistake as well. So here you can see that it seems like I'm easily able to grab this area, and I've got maybe not a firm grip on this location, but I've got some grip. This 2 damage on my tank was unfortunate, but that is what it is. This location looks like I'm easily going to grab it. Let's forward here. I'm pushing up the south at a reasonable clip. The story of this playthrough, I think, is that my left push was very successful, and for the most part, everything on the left push went well. But the right push was very nasty. It was. I was wondering if I could even get a decisive victory, because you can see the swarm of units trying to overwhelm me. And if it wasn't for the fact that I brought a ridiculous amount of artillery, and I had purposely, I'm trying to flank this central open area from both directions, and I had cleverly set up this defensive line. And the goal is to make sure that 3 units can't surround the airfield, so I can rearm my planes. Because if there's 3 units around the airfield, they'll run out of fuel if you're relying on that airfield. So I have to do this ridiculously clever defensive setup here. I have to kind of hold back a massive counterattack on this side, and I have to kind of sneak in on the left flank of the open area to provide some cushioning. And so a part of my strategy is to convince the AI to spread their forces out so I can more systematically destroy them. And I think it worked very well, but it was very slow, unfortunately, because I couldn't really throw my units on an open hex because there were Char B1s floating around. There are Samoas. These tanks are not a joke. It is really, really dangerous with Deductor's mod to carelessly advance your units. You can kind of see that, if you've been watching up to this point, I am extremely cautious, almost cautious to the point of paranoia about advancing my units in such a way that they're not without artillery protection. And that's because these tanks will wreck your units. Even with artillery protection, my units will get damaged. And frequently, even with double artillery protection, these units have such high defensive stats that they can still damage my units. So, you can't play with Deductor's mod with this idea that you can avoid damage. It's not going to happen. You can see I've done my defensive setup here. And now only 2 units can block the airfield, so I can always refuel. I have an 88 gun up front. I have my Panzer III up front. I'm ready to go. I have a ton of artillery on this side because if I don't clear up this flank, I'm never going to be able to push in here. And I think, if I was to look back on this playthrough, it's very clear to me that I was unable to clear this side very quickly, and I wasn't able to really pinch this center group. But it's difficult to do that because there were a lot of units over here. Like a lot of units, and I have a lot of artillery, and I have bridge engineers who are not that effective against tanks, right? So my whole I have to play very carefully. I can never do anything reckless, or units will get destroyed. I think a lot of expert level players will struggle with this map if they haven't adjusted their expectations about how hard it is. You would imagine after doing Stone and Misogyny and Amiens, they would do very well. But I think even if you're an expert level player, you are going to run into issues trying to deal with these swarms of units. This is kind of an early snapshot of what I'm thinking strategically when I get into Russia. When things are going to get hairy. I mean, it's always basically. I feel like starting in 1942, it's always hairy in Russia. There's always an endless horde of units. Maybe even at Vyazma, you could argue that that's a scary scenario. So you could see I'm going to have a very cautious defensive approach. I want to use the terrain to my advantage whenever I can. I want to hold strategically sound positions when I attack. None of this is new. I think a lot of players do stuff like this. But what's different is I'm not guaranteed to win by using tried and true strategies, because the AI's units are much stronger. And if you think this is scary with what I'm dealing with now, it's going to get a lot worse when I get to Russia. So this is just good practice. So you might think you're really, really skilled at this game, and I think you're going to find that a lot of tricks that worked on the regular game, they're not going to work so well here. And you can see one thing I try to do to make these scenarios easier is I try to have as much control as I possibly can get away with. So you can see I'm holding the line. I'm going to be playing defensively, and I'm not going to do anything too crazy. I'm just going to try to hold it together. I caught the Air Force here because my Pioneer spotted the plane. But yeah, there's a whole other sequence of planes ready to go. I got lucky here, actually, with my fighters. That was good. Let us forward a little bit. Let's see, is this the AI moving? Yeah. So you can see there's more Char B1s, there's very strong cavalry, there's tanks. I got smashed by the Air Force in this region. I forgot to put a plane here. I held it together, but it was kind of scary. I didn't know what was going to happen. This plane did 3 damage to my super-powered tank. And that was the only damage that tank took the whole scenario. It kind of shows that even though the Air Force hurt me pretty bad, I was still able to hold it together. In the future, I can't play that way. When I'm dealing with the Russian hordes of planes, I think a classic strategy people use is they send their fighters out and they take out the fighters. And that works in the regular game up to a point, and then you're going to find later on you have to play defensively. I should be playing defensively all the time with my fighters, actually, because this was a nice little trap. The Char B1 goes on the river, double artillery protection. But I need to play defensively when I'm fighting the Russians with my fighters. I need the planes to come to me, and that will actually protect them from damage. And when I'm making these great advancements with my armor and artillery and everything, I can't leave things unprotected. So going on these scouting missions with your fighters is a recipe for disaster. And you saw that hurt me here. I took 6 points of damage from these planes, and my tank is extremely vulnerable. My artillery has been hurt. I got really lucky that the AI didn't like the odds of attacking. That was a reckless move on my part. I do a clever trick here. I force the cavalry unit back, and then I force a surrender on the cavalry unit. I think that's like a colonel. Very strong unit. If you leave infantry out there in the woods without artillery protection, your infantry will get pounded. So don't do that. You can see, like, I'm on turn 7, and I'm still clearing up this mess. This counterattack on this side is not a joke. At least I pulled one of the Char B1s this way. I'd rather have the Char B1 on a river hex than on any of these open hexes. So you can see my strategy of trying to diffuse the armored attack worked very well. So let's fast forward, and let's see. We're on turn 7 still. Hang on. Let's do this. So we're on turn 8. It looks like I have a lot of control, but the thing is, there's more units coming. I mean, this is. I think, in my opinion, this counterattack at Reims is the scariest early war counterattack, because you are facing a serious counterattack on this side of the river. You have a first wave of units that just pour up the road, and they go everywhere. And then you're trying to systematically clean that up, and the map is a little chaotic. And behind that wave is another wave with another scout, and with 2 cavalry units and more infantry, and another Char B1. And if you recklessly seize an open hex, thinking that you cleared the bulk of the counterattack, you're going to lose a unit. I think this is one of the easiest scenarios to lose a unit, because if you don't know that there's like 3 waves of counterattacks, and in fact these waves basically roll on top of each other, almost like a nasty Russian scenario, then you're going to get overwhelmed, and a critical position can be lost. I think this scenario is very, very challenging, especially with the Deductor's mod. I'm not doing anything too wild. Bricada had an excellent demonstration of how to play this scenario rather cleverly. I think he had a pretty easy time when he did it. And it was basically, sneak around the side, hit these like core objectives in the back, and worry about what to do later. But I think he also faced a time crunch on that scenario as well. I don't think, I've thought about this map a lot, and I don't think it's possible to really smoothly take the map. It's a huge map. You have 20 turns. The counterattack is not a joke. And there's lots of key objectives, and many of them are heavily defended with artillery, basically. So you're going to be working really, really hard just to get these secondary objectives. So I don't think that overall there's much benefit to doing a cheesy strategy. I think that it all works out to approximately the same, just because you can't cheese the counterattack. The counterattack is going to absorb a tremendous amount of your time, and then it's a matter of space versus time. And you're basically going to be under intense pressure the whole scenario. So I have things under control. I'm confident I'm going to beat this counterattack back. But I don't know if I'm going to get everything. There's a captured unit I got to get. It's kind of nerve-wracking. You can see there was a Char B1 that ran out of fuel. That's really funny. So if we take a look at this situation, again, look at how many units there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There's like 11 units, and I'm on turn 10. The objective is to clean this up by turn 10. Because if you manage to do that, you're going to be okay. But, I mean, you can see I haven't cleaned this up. My 88 gun has done wonders wiping out tanks here. This is a beautiful trap. They lost all their scouting, essentially, so they see the 88 gun, and so a tank goes onto the river hex to attack it, but there's double artillery protection on that 88 gun. So the 88 gun is just going to destroy all these units going on the river hex. You can see I kind of I'm going to try to seize this objective. One of the difficult things with this map, if you're not careful with your planning, there are key objectives in the back, and you really don't want those reinforced. So you kind of have to send you send a unit back there to help take it. But it's not always so easy to take it because there's a scout car down there, and these scout cars are really hard to kill. So you can see I'm putting a small Guderian-like group towards this southern objective down here. I want to make sure I get that objective so I have a chance at a decisive victory. My artillery got damaged here because I didn't realize the cavalry could sneak around the back. If I had known that, I would have moved this unit instead of reinforcing it. But even so, we're on turn 10. I've managed. I think I'm going to take out 3 units. It's just, this is a lot. There's a Char B1. This Char B1's a serious problem. I can't aggressively push against all this infantry because if any of these guys are without artillery protection, this Char B1's going to go over there and wreck them. And even my tanks can't safely go onto an open hex because this Char B1 is slow and it has low ammo and it has low fuel, but in combat it's devastating. So I desperately want my Char B1 to attack stuff that's not my tanks. And I want them to attack stuff under unfavorable circumstances. So I destroyed a Char B1 over here by coercing it onto the river hex. If I fast forward a little bit, what happens? This Char B1 somehow got destroyed. So I'm starting to clean that up, but I'm very slow. And you can see that there's a lot of stuff still in the south. At this point, I'm not sure that I'm actually going to get a decisive victory. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I have 7 units left, and I'm on turn 11. If I fast forward a little bit, we're down to. I think I forced a surrender here. No, I killed it outright. So we're down to 5 units. I'm beginning the process of taking this objective out. There's still 5 units, but this one's badly damaged. I offered the bridge engineer as bait. That was just so my tank doesn't attack my other stuff, and it works. These bridge engineers on this map are extremely useful to absorb damage for you. And yeah, so I realize I need to accelerate some things. I have to start taking risks. So I'm going to start punching a hole in the back. The artillery has to go. I have no hope at all of taking these objectives without the artillery going. So you can see I'm making my push. The scout is really helpful here because it finishes off the artillery. My scouts performed brilliantly in this scenario. I'm very proud of them. If you think scout cars aren't very helpful in the original game, get Deductor's mod, and I think your whole opinion about scout cars will change. Let's forward a little bit. And now it looks like I'm on turn 12. I should have a chance to take all of this out. You can see I've basically collapsed the pocket. This is the last of the counterattack. Let's forward a little bit. And it looks like, yeah, I took out that infantry. And all that's left is a Char B1, and I've left the bridge engineers without ammo as bait. That should be what they attack, because they want to destroy them, right? Now my fighters are free to go de-entrench things. That took a while. I'm still pretty worried about how long it's going to take me. We forward here. I'm de-entrenching the mountain units. They're really, really deadly entrenched, and I plan on hitting them with my Panzer IV, shoving them on the river, and killing them with my infantry here. That's a strategy I think a lot of players use. Let's forward. Turn 13, I finally take out all of the counterattack. That's 2 or 3 turns slower than you really want. So I'm going to have an exciting finish. Trying to win the scenario. Let's forward here, And now at turn 13, the AI is going to buy. I'm going to definitely take this objective next turn. I'm actually kind of happy that the AI bought units there and not here, because I have more units ready to pounce in that location. So you can see now this group is ready to help assault Reims from the back. That's crucial to my strategy. Let's fast forward. I'm grabbing things, and something to notice is most of my troops don't have trucks, and I think that is a serious problem when you're trying to get as south as possible. So parts of my strategy are kind of biting me in the butt because I'm not investing in trucks. But I prove that I don't need them. That's an important point. Lots of anti-aircraft guns is a good sign because it's not artillery, basically. Let's fast forward. I think my infantry gets really beaten up over here, but they survive, and that's what's important. I've taken my objectives. Let's fast forward. You can see that I had snuck my panzers in the back. I figured it would be easier to take it from the back than the front. This objective is about to go down. I had, bad weather that made things a little scary. Yeah, my infantry got really beat up here, but they survived. And these guys don't have a hero yet, so I have a reason to play them. It's getting hairy though. I'm on turn 16, and I'm still trying to take this objective, and I haven't taken Reims, and I don't even think I'm in contact with the capturable unit hex. But with this anti-aircraft is like a good sign, actually, because I can take this area. All I have to really do is suppress the artillery. So, yeah. And you can see this position is about to collapse. This anti-aircraft gun is not a problem. There's my paratroopers. I actually flew paratroopers down because I was sensing I needed time. And I dropped my paratroopers, and they actually did very, very well. Dropped here, and the fort attacked them, and it didn't do any damage. And I did a fair amount of damage to the fort, which accelerated the collapse of Reims. But there's a lot of units, and I'm on turn 17. It's not clear what's going to happen. Let's fast forward. The AI bought another anti-tank gun, but it was better that than something else. You can see I have to accelerate things. I need to start de-entrenching them. I took 2 damage on a fighter just so I get one more entrenchment down. And yeah, so I managed to take this on turn 18. I think that the way I distributed my forces was really good. I had to do some ad hoc things to make sure I could get all the objectives. And now I'm beginning the collapse on Reims. I use my scouts a lot. I surrender quite a few of these units. Let's fast forward. Yep, here's another surrender. My scout cars really help take Reims. I think that you can see my technique with them if you watch the replay. This fort is going down. So yeah, I have 2 more turns after this. Anti-tank in the city isn't really the problem, it's the pioneers. If we forward, yep. Yeah, I think my pioneers actually did a very good job on this map. I go here. You can see I actually sacrificed my bridge engineers just to reduce the entrenchment by 1. Because I have to break these pioneers this turn. So, and I did. They were forced back, and then I got that objective. So I could get my capturable unit. Then if we forward, this is what's left, basically. 4 units, 2 turns. But this whole thing has collapsed, and there's no artillery, so it shouldn't be a big deal. You see, I used my scout card multiple times here. I forced the surrender on this guy, and then I think I sneak in and get the surrender on this guy. Move forward a little bit. Yeah, man, I love my scout cars. They just, I forced probably 6 or 7 surrenders just in this little spot. You know, that's a lot of prestige for me. I actually kind of ignored the pioneers. I destroyed everything else. By destroying everything else, it just opens up paths to basically attack this pioneers relentlessly. So if we forward, he actually attacked my pioneers and did a lot of damage, but given that I was worried about the decisive, this was a really good thing for me, because now I'm confident I'm going to be able to get the decisive, and I did. So there's that analysis for that. One thing I would like to review is what's going on with my project. I had spent a significant amount of time with Bricata talking about this project. And on, where's my messages? Hang on. I think I have messages buried all over this. Like, this has a message, I think. No, wait. There's messages, you know, between Bricata and I think here is one. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff he and I talked about. There's this one spot with a message. We were exchanging ideas, and we were having a very technical, detailed discussion about what we could do, what we would do to make this idea work. It's probably pages and pages and pages of messaging, and I think we kind of realized, I should say, I think he knew all along. I realized that my original idea I really couldn't do. Too many problems, like way too many problems, some of which I was aware of, and then there were other problems that Bricata brought to my attention that were substantially bad. You know, like, look at this. I think this is our longest. I think we talked about it here. Yeah, we have quite a few messages. So I think what I'll do. What did I do? I'm calculating a core value. I'm rearranging the way I'm doing certain things. I have unit class on a sheet. I have this is just an identifier for unit class. I have the unit names on a sheet, and I have the base cost with Deductor's mod. I have gone through his manual and manually adjusted these, and you can see that there are like a ton of units. It goes all the way out to here. I might clean this up for my particular sheet, because most of these units I will never have as a part of my core. And over here I have total units. This is adding trucks. And then I tally how many of them I have, and then I sum products based on the unit value with how many I have. And what you can see is how the evolution of my core is happening over time. And I had to add in a few things here that are not in the base game, because Deductor added 43 cavalry and 43 crotchets and a few other things. I don't think that exists in the base game. So you can see he made them slightly better and more expensive, but okay. And over here, this base prestige is just when I click turn 1, how much prestige do I show on my prestige meter. So with Poznan, I have 400 prestige. Then I add that up with core value, which is the sum product of this row with this row. and then add that together, and that's my total prestige. So what I'm thinking about doing this with everybody, but instead of asking who played a scenario better, I think Bricada's convinced me that that's very, very difficult to do, even under ideal conditions. What I would like to ask is, can we infer anything about prestige growth over time with these scenarios? And there's, we can even just look at it in isolation for a player, and then we can pool them all together and put an indicator in there just to see if the player had any impact on prestige growth. But I think it'd be interesting. You could even throw in a year dummy for all of the years of the grand campaign, and just see if it was significant on your prestige growth. I think it would be significant. That's one basic question we could look at. What was happening with prestige growth over time? Then you can look and see, did a particular player handle that well? Was it significant who was playing? I strongly suspect that the answer to that will be yes. But it won't tell us. What we can't really infer is if somebody played the grand campaign better. But you could say, if you had a statistically significant coefficient on player 1, which let's say that was me, and it was negative 0.1, you could say something like, I, on average, per scenario, was decreasing my my total value by 10%, because I'm going to convert this into a percentage. I'm expecting that if you were to do this over the whole grand campaign, it's going to be a negative coefficient on everybody. Like, every player is going to experience negative growth in their prestige value. Because I think 43 to 45, you're going to be investing a lot in overstrengthening and elite replacements, and the amount of prestige you're accumulating will fall. But in Idle Cleese's playthrough, he did gain some prestige in 44, so maybe I'm wrong about that. So maybe if you're playing on Rommel, you'll see a decline in 43 and early 44, and then you'll get it all back. And I would point out that Deductor did end up with over 10,000 prestige at the point he stopped, which is insane, especially when you consider the liberal way he spent prestige. So maybe even my idea on the coefficient on that variable may not be accurate. So that's one thing we could ask. We can also we could just run a regression on every player. So that way we could just see, how did this player do with prestige growth? And you could even look at years. You could put a time dummy in for every year, and you can see if there were some years that they had an easier time with. But I will never be able to look at the two coefficients between one player I and player J. I'll never be able to say that because this coefficient is higher, that player did a better job. Maybe with Bricada and Idle Cleese, I could do that, because they're playing the exact same game with no mods. And I'm sure Bricada would be very interested to see how he performed against him. So that's something I could do. I could group a regression with just them two. That'll give me 156 observations. And if I throw a time trend in one dummy, and then the dependent variable will be this total core value, we could more definitively, collectively say who did better in the grand campaign. It might be really difficult to estimate who did better in a scenario, because I would have to do a little fudging with where I'm tracking unit acquisition and heroes with what the prestige is for a scenario. And I was finding it to be very confusing, and when Bricada and I were calculating it, it seems like we're off. So I don't think that's a question at the moment I could answer, but I could, when Bricada finishes his grand campaign, we could just pool all that together, and then we can find out on average what impact the player had on the growth rate. And if I track Idocles in Bracada the exact same way, I think it would be a fairly accurate portrayal of who had a better time. I think that Idocles will perform better, but he is not playing blind. So, and he's also not playing with an historic core. But I'm curious how much better he would perform. So, let's say the coefficient was like positive 0.05. He saw an average of 5% growth rate over the whole campaign, and Bracada might be negative 0.03. So he saw, 3% negative growth rate over the whole campaign. I would argue that Bracada probably didn't play that bad. So that's something to think about. I don't know if my audience has ideas of other types of variables I could add to the regression. I could show you what I was thinking originally of running. Come on. I was thinking about running this bad boy, but and I defined everything here. But I don't think it's going to work. We were trying to kind of find this complicated way of weighing things to kind of make them comparable between using Deductor's mod and not. The ultimate problem was less about Deductor's mod, and it was more about the fact that we're playing at 25% prestige, and there's an endless series of problems with comparing that to Rommel. So this regression will get a lot simpler. I'll drop a lot of things. I'll keep the intercept. I'll include an indicator function for players, and I will include I have a time thing somewhere in here, TIT. I'll include a linear trend. I don't think it makes sense to include how long a player spent on the scenario, because the time trend is going to capture the fact that the scenarios are getting harder. And obviously, even Idocles with his lightning clicking speed is going to spend more time on later scenarios. I mean, he spent 2.5 hours on Stalingrad, which is a crazy amount of time for him. And that's way longer than 24 minutes on Posnat. So I think a time trend is going to capture all of that time variation for us. And we could split that. I could create, a vector of time indicator functions, and we can see if certain years have a prediction. So you would imagine there's some sort of coefficient on 1939. I'm imagining it's very high. The prestige growth rate for all players on average is probably maybe greater than 10%, 15%, something like that. And probably that's true in 1940, and it's probably true in 1941, and then 1942. I'm expecting a parabola, basically. We're going to peak at 42, and then the prestige growth rate is going to fall. But I might be wrong. Maybe it's going to peak at 42 and decline in 43, and then do a little small blip in 44, and then decline again in 45. So it'll be a sloppy parabola. I'm actually not sure what that would be called, like a polynomial of degree 3 or something. So I don't know what other variables I could possibly add in here. One thing Bracada mentioned was, what if you tracked how many artillery units were deployed in a scenario? If you look at my layout here, that may not be so hard, except we're going to run into an issue later. So I'm tracking how much artillery I have. So yeah, I'm up to 6 of these guys, and I have a Stug. That's what's in my core, but that doesn't mean that I'm deploying all those units every scenario. So I would have to go back to each scenario and look at the turn 1 and see how many artillery units were deployed. Because he has a theory that if you have less than a critical number of artillery units, you're going to struggle. I think that's probably true. I'm not sure I'm so excited about tracking that, because I'm not sure it's going to provide much enlightenment. I think most of us would expect that the more artillery deployed, the higher your growth rate of prestige. Yeah, I don't. I was thinking about adding planes and infantry and tanks, but I'm looking at it. If you look at the core composition for the players, it's really not that different. We're kind of deploying similar things. The differences really come from me, where I don't deploy more planes. Deductor and Idocles are both using an air-heavy approach. I have a fighter-heavy, air-heavy approach, but I'm often not deploying my tactical bomber. So that's a big difference, and I also deploy 288 guns a lot. I'm a big believer in the 88 gun. They have bailed me out of so many difficult situations. So I'm probably going to drop this entire page, because I think for every player I'll create a page that looks like this. And it'll make it difficult to compare between players, but I'm not sure that was kind of providing useful information. You can kind of see that we're converging. Deductor is a weird outlier. I also kind of realized because he's not getting heroes, it's skewing everything all to hell. Like, Deductor should have like 6 more units just from heroes. So it looks like we're totally outclassing him, but it's a little biased in our favor. So I don't think this is very helpful. The data is also not well organized. This is not data friendly, whereas this is data friendly. You could stick this in a statistical software package. You can manipulate this data. You can transform this data, and the software package will know exactly what you're doing. It's all broken down like this. And it's also kind of cool just to see the evolution over the scenarios for a player. And if I want to compare someone, what we really care about, I think core composition matters, but I think it would be very difficult for me to prove that. So we're just going to kind of substitute core value. I think this is actually the most comparable thing between playing with Deductor's mod versus not playing with Deductor's mod, because I think I will have a higher core value than the other players because they're more expensive units. And they typically have better stats, which seems realistic. So that's where I'm at. I don't know what I could possibly track that would be useful to add into a regression. I'm going to have to totally abandon the idea that I could prove a player played a scenario better. I might be able to do that between Idocles and Bricata. That's something I can look at later, but I think I can't really do that comparison until Bricata finishes the grand campaign. Because, I mean, I could track his data, stick it in right now, because he's done Smolensk, so that's like 27 scenarios, and then if I only run Idocles' 27 scenarios, I'd have 54 observations. That's enough to loosely get an idea of where things are. And that might tell us who's playing better overall, but it doesn't tell us who won a scenario. One idea I had was tracking the number of objectives captured, both minor and major, but I realized that the vast majority of the time, we're going to capture the same number of major objectives, and statistically, I'm not convinced that the number of minor objectives I have captured will be significant. Maybe in 1939, but I think by 1940 it won't be. I do capture more minor objectives than everybody else, but because my prestige count's so low, it doesn't really reflect back in my total player value. It does in comparison to Deductor, which is one of the reasons I'm doing this playthrough, is I want to prove I can do better than him on the prestige front. But that's kind of skewed because I got hero units and I get prestige from surrenders and he didn't. But even with all of that, I think that you're clearly going to see I am blowing him out of the water. And some would argue that's because you've got 6 hero units and he doesn't. you might be right about that. So maybe I'm being a little too harsh. And frankly, if you watch his playthrough, some of these scenarios, he's absolutely outplaying me. Like, just objectively speaking, he's outplaying me. He doesn't do. He uses cute tactical tricks to get him out of trouble, and I use some long-term strategic ideas to get myself out of trouble. I also am very dependent on my 88 gun. It's what I call the lazy man's way of dealing with French armor or British armor. I don't get too cute with tactics. I just go 88 gun, kill it, and it's very effective. So that's what I have to say for now. If you guys have any ideas on how I can do this better, or if there's a variable that would be easy to track that you think would be insightful, please let me know. Until then, Richard out.